Me gusta mucho practicar el español. En la traducción en inglés. De hecho, I'm very pleased to be with you. Muy bien. Me gusta mucho hablar español porque hay muchos años que son venido en España, pero he todo olvidado en la lengua. Nada de la felicidad. En la felicidad con los españoles tan simpáticos. Do you hear me in Spanish? Or in my ear, I hear myself speaking in English. What do you hear?
No, hear English.
No, only English.
They hear Spanish, sorry.
Only Spanish. Porque sin práctica es muy difícil.
Perdón, señor Brook. Vamos a pedirle al traductor que si el señor Brook habla en español, no traduzca al inglés. Por favor.
Pero he molto hablado una ensalada mista non con inglés, con italiano. Non lo so, quando è una palabra, un parole italiano che viene nella bocca, ahorita è una gran, puedo decir en español, en inglés, una felicidad personal, intima. Esa qui, hoy, con el premio, estoy qui con felicidad. Now we can speak English.
De acuerdo, abrimos el turno de preguntas.
Preguntas. That I understand. Okay. Silence, that's my beautiful question.
Buenas tardes, señor Brook. Bienvenido.
Al fondo.
Where?
Aquí. Here.
Good.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Me gustaría iniciar esta rueda de prensa preguntándole, en un mundo como el actual, tan próximo a la locura, ¿por qué sigue siendo tan necesario el teatro?
It's a very good question. Why is it necessary to have? I can only give you the answer that my doctor gave me. When a doctor sees people and he has to give them often very bad news, he sees that he has a role in life. It may be just for one person, but if one person can leave his office feeling a tiny bit better, then he has been useful. Clara? Tell me when the president...
No, you can continue.
Yeah. For me, in English, and I'm sure it's the same in Spanish, there is only two words that have deep meaning for me.
Sí.
One of those words is shared. It's a terrible thing for theater on any level to be dominated by the ego. But when you
You can speak normally because
Okay.
it's simultaneous.
Okay, but when you see that in the theatre, even if it's an audience of 10 people, 50 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, doesn't matter. It is only alive when something is shared between all those people. Then it becomes not only alive, but the other word that has the deepest meaning for me, it can be useful. Useful. This is a very great word. It's like the story I told you about the doctor. The doctor who can give a little hope to one person is useful. If we find that after a play, and we have had many, many experiences of this over many, many years, people at the end go away feeling that something in them has been touched, and it even stays for 1 or 2 days. And it gives them a little taste that life, not their life, not your life, but life can have a meaning. And this, when this can happen, then the theatre is useful. But of course it's a challenge because it is very, very difficult.
Siguiente pregunta, por favor.
Buenas tardes, señor Brook. Yo quería preguntarle sobre... Soy Cristian Franco, de la Nueva España. Quería preguntarle por uno de sus viajes a España del año 49, cuando a la salida de la casa de Dalí fueron usted y el grupo con el que viajaba apresados por un grupo de guerrilleros. Que me gustaría que nos narrara aquel episodio, si es tan amable.
Yeah. I'll never forget it. I had been working very happily with Dali, and his beautiful wife, Gala, looked after her husband as a wife, as a great wife can do. And of course, she was also his business manager, because Bali was worth a fortune. He did everything for his paintings, and he had a great rivalry with Picasso. He said, I want my pictures to worth more than Picasso's. And this was him, a great motivation, encouraged by his wife. And I had gone to stay with him because I wanted him to do the designs for a production of Salome at Covent Garden that I was preparing. And I thought no one could give the more extraordinary, rich, strange imagery of that play more than Dali. So we stayed there. We listened to the opera. He did sketches, he did paintings. And then in the end, we found what we needed for the set, for the costumes, and we put them carefully in my trunk. We got on the car that was to drive us to the airport. And on the way, and I learned why it was called the Costa Brava, because on the way, suddenly, the car was surrounded by young men with machine guns pointing at us and doing a sign to get off. I couldn't understand why. They took us into a forest. I thought they were going to shoot us right away. All I could understand is that they were rebel partisans. But when I thought if they're taking us into the forest, it's to shoot us immediately. Not at all. They took cords and tied us, but tied us back to back with another person, just like that. And as I lay there, I remembered that as I got into the car, Gala, who I just wanted to kiss for the beautiful time we'd spent together in Port Ligat, gave me a paper to sign. I said, what's this? She said, it's a receipt that you have Salvador Dali's pictures in your trunk, because if something terrible happened to you on the way, and she dared to say this to her guest, you know, if you perchance were ill or had an accident or were killed, how could I get the payment for Dali's pictures. I said, okay, I signed it. And then suddenly, here was the worst she could do. So I said to the terrorists with their guns, I said, please, I will go and sit quietly as long as you like on the floor of the forest, tied to the person behind me, the time for you to go and try to get some reward from the authorities for letting me free. But all I ask you is that I didn't say what, just some pictures, paintings that are very dear to me in my trunk. Can you just give me my case? So they said yes. And suddenly, to my amazement, through the forest, I saw somebody running and throwing it down on the ground in front of me. A case which had Dali's pictures in it. So I knew that for Gala, she could get back her money now. So we stayed there. Long time passed. With our hands, we tried to undo the knots. And I began to speak. I don't know who it is who's now here, but I spoke to one of the people who was my companion there, and we chatted just to make the time go through. A whole day passed, a whole night, and an Englishman that I was tied to, and who hadn't said a word, a very modest Englishman. I said, please tell me, just to pass the time, what is your profession? Little pause, as only an Englishman can be really embarrassed, and with a real English, modest embarrassment, he said, life insurance. And so with that, I knew that he wouldn't have to pay his money, and we fiddled and fiddled, undid the knots, got free, and then got to our feet. And it was a lesson to learn how you get out of a dark forest. And we just saw a light through the trees. Oof. We went towards it. No. There was another tree blocking the way. Light through another tree. We went towards it. There was a big ditch that you couldn't go across. But in that way, about 4 a.m, we got out onto the big highway. Oof, free at last. We walked along the highway with our suitcases, with the Gali pictures, everything, and came into a little village in the middle of the night. Ooh, we thought, we are saved. And so we went there to the police headquarters. And as we came to the police headquarters, just to knock on the door and say, tell them what had happened, all the windows flew open and there were guns pointing at us. And they said, hands up. I said, what's going on? We have been told that terrorists are in this forest and you must be part of the gang of terrorists. Hands up, we're going to put you in prison. Thank God there was someone with us who could speak Spanish and could explain that we weren't the terrorists, we were the victims. Oof. And so all went well. And we were driven straight to the airport. We got on a plane thinking now our apples were over. And as I got onto the plane, I saw on the wings the letters which they had on every plane, just the official marking for that plane. And this plane that we got on, the markings, the name in the sky for this plane was Gala. Ooh. I thought, destiny is chasing us everywhere. Gala. But Gala brought us good news. We came back to England, and there were people from the press, like today, surrounding us, because someone had told them that I'd had this invention. And one of them said, we think that you're doing this new production at Covent Garden, and we think that this story is completely false. It's just pure publicity to get you into the papers to advertise what's going to be your production at Covent Garden. So there That's my last experience with the press of that sort. Now it's over to you to save the reputation of the press. Nobody laughs. Sorry. I like to bring everything, every time, back to the greatest gift that the gods have given us. The fact that we can, at every moment, we can always laugh. So make us laugh. Not a word.
Siguiente pregunta, por favor.
Una pregunta, por favor.
Buenas tardes. Raúl Molina, para la agencia EFE. Para alguien con su trayectoria cultural en su país y a nivel europeo y a nivel internacional, ¿qué reflexión le merece estar a apenas 10 días de que se produzca el Brexit?
There I will speak from the heart. I think that we're surrounded by politicians in every country of every part who make big and tragic mistakes, but I think this is the stupidest mistake that has been made in recent years. There was an ideal in the European Union, like the United States, for every country with its own independence to be united, instead of looking for quarrels and going into the terrible history of wars between one country and next. So many, you know as well as I do, the whole history of Europe over 100 years, hundreds of years of fighting between countries next to one another instead of living happily. And here was an idealistic attempt to make the United States of Europe, in which, as in America, no state loses its own nature, its own specific qualities, but there is a sense of something wider and bigger. And even today, all the politicians come back to this search that we're all here to live together. And so, the idea of Brexit was so tragic, just breaking, and it was breaking because of something which again is a tonteria, a stupidity, incredible stupidity, which was to have a referendum, which is a very noble democratic idea, to ask the people yes or no. But you can only give an answer yes or no if you know all the aspects, so that really to give a true, like in Parliament, to give a real yes or no, you have to have several weeks of people being given all the different aspects. But here, the people were asked to say yes or no without any idea what its consequences could be to the agriculture, to the money, to the stock exchange, all those, nobody was trained. They were just asked yes or no. So, a large part of old-fashioned Tories who had this suspicion of everything that was outside England, because England is this beautiful little island protected by the sea. Automatically, these English people sitting in their clubs said to one another, of course we don't want anything to do with these bloody foreigners. And another younger and wiser one said, no, let's say yes. But it was a stupid vote. It was not democratic. So that this led to a situation. Now, nobody sees how they can get out of it. And all, I'm not a politician, can say, I think that history is full of mistakes. But this Brexit is one of the saddest, stupidest mistakes. And let's hope that somewhere something can be rendered. There we are. An Englishman has spoken.
¿Más preguntas?
ciudadanos del país. A raíz de lo que decía al principio sobre lo útil que puede ser el teatro en ciertos momentos, aunque solo sea para una persona, ¿qué le motiva para seguir creando? Hubo en estos días un estreno aquí en Oviedo de su obra Guay. ¿Qué le motiva para seguir creando con 94 años?
None of us know how long we are here for on this earth. And Shakespeare, everything is in Shakespeare. Shakespeare says we must endure our going away, going hence, as we endure our coming hither. This is something that's not up to any of us. But if up to my last moment, instead of sitting comfortably in retirement somewhere, sitting under a tree, drinking the best Manzanilla, and can have just a happy life, that for me would be boring, a boring life. But as long as I feel that I can go on working and it can be useful to someone, I go on. And there is a law of energy that as you give energy, you receive energy. As you receive energy, you go on giving it. And that, fortunately, and even here today, it's your presence and your questions that keep, without them, I can't make a speech. You must stop me if I speak for too long. But this give and take is what keeps us all alive. Can you imagine anything more deadly? Use this word, which is so powerful, more deadly than a press conference where nobody whatsoever speaks. And we sit here looking at one another, and you say, next question, 0.
Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta y además ya estaban levantando la mano. Aquí Ana. Sí.
Hola, hello.
Hola.
Soy Ana Romero de Televisión Española. Me gustaría preguntarle por cuándo decidió crear ese espacio vacío que usted ha puesto tanto en valor en el teatro y cuál es para usted el significado de ese espacio y de la relación del actor con los espectadores.
I don't ever like to use a word that for me is blasphemy. There is only one creator, and for anyone who talks to me says, how did you create? What is your next creation? This is blasphemy. I work in the way I talked about in the beginning, to try to make something with the means I have at my disposal as well as possible. That is all. And that's all I can say today. But that's what gives the energy. That's what gives the impulse. And empty space. If you read the book, I say to so many people, you don't need to read the book. Just read the title. The empty space is that most spaces, that's why I'm very happy in this space now, because it isn't loaded with too much decoration. To work in a theatre where already, as I did when I began working in the opera, there were costumes and chandeliers in the theatre and a red curtain and people coming as dressed up as they could. And in that, there was already something clamped on the event. And I felt that if one can just clean it away, and that's why in my book I said there are just these different sorts of theatre. There is deadly theatre, and anyone who goes to the theatre and has suffered from a boring evening knows what deadly is. A deadly bore, one says in English. So one wants to avoid that. So now, what we've been talking about, the theatre must come to life. And there I said there are these two forms of theatre. holy theatre, where something from a divine source beyond our understanding can just enter, as we know, with all the beautiful designs of great painters, of great musicians. Something beyond them comes into the works and we receive it. And that is holy theatre. But a theatre that loses touch with the earth. This is all about us, about human beings. This is the rough theatre. It's close to the earth, and the two must come together. There must be that holiness and roughness coming together. Two completely different qualities that meet at the moment of experience. And that's why the last category is the immediate theatre, which means that theatre, we can talk about it, but the experience of theatre can only be in the eternal now. Now, as it's happening in front of us, that is the immediate. And in the immediate, the rough and the holy must come together and avoid being the opposite of being alive, being deadly. So then, now, as I say, you don't need to read the book anymore.